Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Let me know if the audio levels are okay. This has been a bear trying to get everything working correctly. It's a long process. I ended up basically uninstalling and reinstalling everything, so that was a lot of fun. I tell you, I've had a lot of issues with Windows 11 on things that really should just work, and they're just not. But it's a learning process. We're getting there. So today we wanted to talk about sort of 7 steps to sort of prepare you for your first time being a dungeon master in a D&D session. Been coming across a lot of advice sort of in the online sphere about this recently. I don't know what the sharp uptick is. Seems weird that they're trying to get more people into it. I assume probably because they have that new WotC has the new adventure coming out, the obelisk, whatever it is beneath Vandelver. So they have that sort of adventure path coming out. So I assume that that's why there's been sort of this spike in people talking about, being dungeon master for the first time. Just as it's a little loud in my ear. There we go. So yeah, I thought I'd jump in and kind of talk about some of my sort of 7 steps or 7 tips to sort of help people who are thinking about getting into D&D in general, and especially as becoming sort of like that dungeon master and getting behind that screen and doing that. So, there's not really that much to talk about. Otherwise, we do have the next solo session coming up soon, so stay tuned for that. I'm hoping to get that done later this week. So maybe tomorrow, we'll see. I need to go back and make a few more notes, and then we'll be good to go on that. But I think we're going to do this. We might have a double session. We'll just see how it goes. So, yeah, 7 steps. So let's go ahead and jump over. And before we get into the 7 steps, I want to talk first about some advice or tips that, like I said, there's been this spike, so I'm hearing a bunch of it, that I don't necessarily agree with, and then we'll talk about why, and then we'll go into the actual steps themselves. So, one of the first things that I hear a lot of people say is, one of their big advices is sort of shopping. So the first thing that they often want people to do is go and buy stuff for D&D. And I'm not sure that that's something that I necessarily agree with. And let me bring this up. Oh, Baldur's Gate 3? I haven't played it yet. I'll be real honest, I just haven't played it. I don't usually buy games when they first come out. I like to wait to make sure everything's out and get everything that I want out of it, and then sort of swoop in later and pick it up. So I'm usually, many moons behind other people who are playing the game. I expect that I will like it. I've played Larian's other stuff, like the other entries like in their Divinity series, so I think just having that D&D, official D&D staple brand stapled onto it, I think I'm really probably going to enjoy it. But I'm not in a horrific rush to play it, though it is very difficult sort of trying to dodge spoilers because a lot of people talk about it. But sort of the first thing that I think a lot of people do, or a lot of advice out there, is they ask people to buy things, which is a very interesting thing, I think, when you're first new to D&D. I like to think of it sort of, imagine if you wanted to take up, let me think of a different hobby, like golfing. Let's say golfing. And the first step to getting into golf was, like, go spend hundreds of dollars on a set of golf clubs. Why would I do that if I don't know if I like golfing yet? Right? Why would I make this very large purchase, a lot of money investiture in a very expensive hobby, in the case of golf, but without knowing whether I'm going to like it yet or not? Which seems very, very strange to me. So yeah, I'm definitely not... I kind of shy people away from that, so one of the things that they'll be like, oh yeah, well, you're gonna need the core rule book, so you're gonna need the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Player's Handbook, and you're probably gonna want one of the big box Adventure Pass that WotC puts out, like the new Fandelver one that's coming out, or Strahd, or one of the many, many others that they've made over the years, in the past 10 years. And You know, you're probably going to want to get a D&D Beyond subscription, get those books in D&D Beyond. It's like, it's very easy to spend a lot of money very quickly on this hobby, which I don't think is very good advice for somebody who's not sure, especially if they're not sure if they like the hobby at all first, and they're not sure if they like running the game yet. If they haven't really done that, I don't think that's particularly good or reasonable advice for that. And so, sort of piggybacking off of that is, it's like one that I see a lot is that people who want to become dungeon masters, who want to take the time behind the screen, read the books. And I have part of that in my 7 steps, but not to the extent that I think a lot of people do. A lot of people oftentimes are like, you need to have a very firm understanding of like the entirety of the rules and know what all the characters can do and what every class can do and what, you know, have a good handle on all the monsters or a large chunk of the monsters that are in the monster manual and know all the stuff that's sort of in the DMG. And I don't think that that's very useful advice. It's not, hey, so you want to get into this hobby, you need to read 3+ books real quick, and then maybe you can get into it. And I just don't think, again, that that's a particularly helpful advice, and I think that puts a lot of people off. When you're like, hey, you need to sit down and read a few books before we even start to think about playing or running a game of D&D, and that's not helpful in my mind. I think that puts a lot of people off the hobby rather than bring them into the hobby. I think that there is a feedback loop in there where people who are interested in being Dungeon Master, who want to start to get into that and get into it, there's always this sort of sense, and I remember it very much from my own experience, that sort of idea that I need to prep more before I'm ready to run. And I'm not sure that could be a feedback loop in which you're like consistently thinking that you're never ready, right? You're almost ready. You're almost always ready, but you're never quite ready. And so I think doing something like throwing 3+ books at somebody like right off the bat about if they're trying to run D&D, I think feeds that a lot, and I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. Hey, how are you doing? Nice to have you guys in. Yeah, obviously we're talking about, you know, D&D and preparing for your first session as like a dungeon master. There's a lot of that sort of talk going on right now, and I'm sort of picking out some of the good things and some of the bad things. Right now we're kind of going over some things that, some advice that I've seen that I not necessarily agree with. I think that it comes from a good basic idea, but I think that the expression of it usually doesn't work quite correctly. So sort of reading the books and making sure that you have sort of this like almost encyclopedic knowledge of the game before you do anything in the game, I don't think is very helpful. The third one that I come across very often is, and this is a core D&D problem from WotC, from Wizards of the Coast, making the game, and the DMG and how it is. I definitely feel that the way that they set things up is they expect you to homebrew things. They either expect you to buy one of those big modules, which we talked about already, or they expect you to start homebrewing from the very first. Like, just the way that the DMG, Dungeon Master's Guide, is set up in 5th edition, is set up in a way in which it starts you off with creating basically an entire universe, which is not particularly helpful, I think, for most people. Right? I don't think, like, that's a front-loading a lot of work, especially on a new DM who's maybe not very familiar with all of it, right? Be like, oh, well, you want to run some games and have some fun with your friends, you know, have a nice night, you know, drink some beer and soda, eat some pretzels, and, you know, play games for a few hours. Well, to do that, first you need to create an entire multiverse. Right? That's not particularly helpful advice. And then I think most people will be like, ooh, so you're telling me that I need to do like hours and hours and hours and hours of prep work before I can enjoy this thing with my friends? And I may hate it after I do that? I think I'm going to give that a miss, right? Which is obviously not what we want. Oh, you've been working on a homebrew class? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Definitely drop the link in chat, and then I'll take a look at it later. We'll take a look at that. It'll be interesting to look at. Homebrew stuff's always fun. But that ties in just what we're talking about. Like, obviously that's not a perfectly new first-time DM sort of thing that you want to do. That's something that, you know, people who have experience with the game and understanding of the system, you know, all that stuff. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's helpful to start homebrewing right off the bat. I think you need that foundation of the rules. Like I said, we have this idea that most DMs come in and they don't particularly know the system rules very well, and 5th edition in general isn't written in a way to help DMs get that mastery. There's a lot of reading in between the lines you have to do with 5th edition to try to understand why the numbers are the way they are, why things are set up the way they are, and why things do the things the way they do them. Which, again, 5e, it's not really written to help people do that. So if you're brand new and you didn't come from another system, or you didn't come from an older edition of D&D, and you have, you know, that very strong background in basically games as a system, as a design system, that can be really difficult to do. So, and I think if you look at a lot of the stuff that's on sort of like D&D Beyond, things like that, that's got that sort of homebrew tags, and look through that stuff, there's a lot of really, really just a hot mess out there. It's just not very, very good. It's either way overpowered or way underpowered, or, you know, doesn't work the way that people want it to. And you get a lot of that. So, another thing that I think comes up a lot is when they talk about sort of people getting ready, DM, and they talk about, actually I'll just wrap sort of these two kind of together because they're very similar. And that's running a session 0 and helping the players make their characters. Now, from my assumption that the person is a new dungeon master, and probably the people they're playing with are probably new to the hobby as well, I don't think that that's stuff you guys should be doing. I think session 0s are great with the understanding that you're going to be playing like an ongoing campaign. Your first time out of the gates as a DM, that is setting you up for failure, right? Don't try to run a campaign, try to run like a one-shot, like a one-session adventure. That's really all we want to do, right? Just to see if this is something you like, if it's something your friends enjoy. You know, let's get one actual game session in the books before we start doing things like, oh, we're going to run a session 0 and we're going to have all these dedicated backstories for all these characters. We're going to create this gigantic world, and we're going to go through that, and we're going to have, oh, there's going to be this villain and this story thread that's going to be happening, and there's going to be this twist that's here, and like, just relax. And again, assuming that you are a new DM and your players are new, the idea that you're going to be able to help them make player characters, I think, is pretty unreasonable, right? I don't think that anybody who comes in the hobby has very early on has a very good, you know, foundation for the rules and how things work, and it's very much, in my mind, the blind leading the blind in that case, right? You have people that are trying to help their friends, but they're giving them their advice from their extremely limited and sometimes, you know, fallible experience and understanding of how the game's supposed to work. So, yeah, I don't think that that's where we want to spin that thing. And then another one that I see quite often, and probably the last one, is they talk a lot about, especially for people getting ready to run that first session, they're like, oh, you're going to need these maps, you can get some miniatures or tokens, get your virtual tabletop set up. Again, like, we front load, a lot of this advice front loads so much work on the DM before they can even get to the table for the very first time with their friends. And I don't think, you know, being like, oh, you need to read 3 books, you need to have a firm understanding of, you know, Roll20 or some other virtual tabletop and how those work, like an entire software suite. You need to get these maps, you need to have all the tokens ready, you gotta have all this, and you gotta have all that stuff done. That's not a functional expectation you can have, I think, on any DM, much less somebody brand new to being a DM or brand new to D&D in general, right? So I don't think that those are the sort of things that we come across that aren't at least in my mind, that always kind of make me cringe a little bit. I'm like, I don't think that's really helpful for somebody who's like brand new to really try to accomplish, right? I think that it can be really discouraging and really put them off the hobby long before they ever get to the table and actually, you know, try to run a session of D&D for their friends. Okay, cool. Yeah, let me grab it. I will grab that link real quick. Grab this real quick, and I will, and I'll save this guy for later. There we go. And post that there, and I'll save it. Then I'll take a look at that stuff later. So yeah, let me hop over so that way you guys can see the same thing that I'm looking at. Go ahead and do that. One moment, please. I forgot I switched all this around, so all the stuff that I thought was going to be in here, of course, isn't in here. Let me. Well, of course, it doesn't want to work easily. It never wants to work easily. Never wants to work. Now I gotta play with this real quick. Alright, there we go. Oh, put it on top. Pull that down there. Okay. That should be good. Like, let me. Oh, I got it now. Yeah, move my guy. Oh. There we go. Alright. That'll do for now. That'll do, pig. Oh, you know, August was a very long month. A very long and difficult month. Thanks for asking. It's been busy. Busy and unexpected in many ways. Alright. So, yeah. For the first thing, so here are basically 7 basic steps that I really think about. Yep. So, 7 steps to think about for running your first sort of like D&D session. Right? So, first, I think the most one that I think a lot of the advice often sort of overlooks is, hey, you probably need to get some friends together. You need some players, right? You probably need some players. Yeah, I think obviously if you have the ability to be a player at a table, I think that's very helpful first. That's going to give you definitely a leg up, I think, from anybody who's just trying to get into the hobby fresh, just 100% cold. But you know, sometimes that is how somebody has to get into the hobby to get their friends interested in the hobby, right? And so I think the first thing you need to do is get some players. Like, there's no point in trying to prep an adventure and run an adventure and get all this stuff together if you're not going to have anybody to actually run that adventure for, right? You got to have some players, right? You need some players. That's in my mind the first thing that you need. And I say to sort of like work inside out with your sort of social network. So, you know, friends, you know, people you go to school with, the classmates, people at work, ask them, you know, and work your way outward. I find it's easier to talk to people you already have a relationship with than start by reaching out over the internet on something that's like Reddit and looking for group or something like that. I think that's in my mind is the place you should go to is sort of like the last ditch resources, um, because this way you'll be able to play in person, which is always nice. It's my preferred way to play in person and play with people that you already kind of know, right? And so you don't get some of the. I think a lot of sort of those, if you read, the Reddit horror stories or D&D horror stories and things like that, a lot of that, I think, often comes from people playing with other weirdos on the internet, right? And it's always a grab bag. You don't know what you're going to get. Sometimes you're going to get really great people. Sometimes you're going to get really awful people. And so I think it helps to work with people that you already know, and you already are like, yes, I can sit in the same room at a table with this person for, 3 to 4 hours and not make me want to throttle them or run away screaming. So that's sort of my sort of take on that. And I think another thing that a lot of advice doesn't take for granted is that you need to make the commitment clear. Because I know there's a Ziva Shah comic where he talks about, oh well, come play D&D with us. Also, you're gonna need to give up these hours every week for the rest of your life. So make the commitment clear. Hey, we're going to play a one-shot. We're going to sit down for like 3 to 4 hours. We're going to play this game. And that's it. That's it. Right. There's no like ongoing commitment. Because I think that often will discourage players who are like, I don't know if I'm going to like it. And I don't want to commit, one day every week for the rest of my life for something that I have no idea about. Right. Or I'm only doing because I want to, spend time with my friend. Or something like that. So make it a very simple, very clear commitment. Make it very easy for your friends to say yes to, right? And then I'd say, send them like a video or two about, those sort of intro tips to like how to play D&D, something like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely need to get off your butt and just do it. Unfortunately, right? That's sort of what our point 6 is. It's like at some point you just have to do it. You just have to be the DM. But I think in the beginning, send them like a couple videos. Try not to send them too much stuff about D&D, but like maybe a couple of short videos about like, hey, this is sort of D&D kind of wrapped up, just as sort of a primer for like people who aren't at all familiar with it. I think can be really helpful, and I think you should also have the expectation that they're not going to watch it. So not only are they not going to watch it, I think not only are they not going to watch it, right? They're going to. You can't expect them to bring anything to the game either, which is another common thing, right? I don't think you can expect them to even bring anything like a character sheet, pencils, scrap paper, anything like that. Dice, certainly not dice, but right. Because I think for a lot of people who are first-time players, especially if they don't really understand the game, they probably think the closest thing that they probably have an analogy for is like a board game, right? Or a card game. And you're like, yeah, and so my friend invited me to their like D&D night, and I'm thinking, oh, well, it's probably like, the poker nights I've played in the past, and all I need to do is like show up, right? That's sort of the idea, is like, oh, we're gonna play Catan or something like that, or Ticket to Ride. Like, I don't need to bring anything. Like, they've got the game already, obviously, so I don't need to bring anything except for maybe some snacks or drink or stuff like that. But right, so don't assume that they're gonna do any sort of background information. Like, they're not gonna get ready to play. Like, just don't make that assumption about your players. And that's something that I've learned. I think you have to learn as a DM over time through experience. Is that players aren't going to spend a lot of time thinking about your game. The only time they're going to be thinking about the game most of the time is at the game. for any time outside, once they walk away from the table, right, the game stops. But as a DM, right, you're always kind of doing stuff in the background, usually. You're thinking about stuff. But for players, right, you show up to the game, you play the game, you walk away, and be like, oh, that was fun, see you next week. And then don't think about it probably until that next week. But yeah, that's sort of the first tip, I feel like, for everything. Is, you know, there's some practical advice about, like, how to get players, I think. And I think that that's really helpful for a lot of people. I think a lot of people really struggle with that aspect of D&D. I know I certainly have. And I think it's difficult to find people to play D&D with sometimes. But the nice thing is that if you're willing to run games, if you're willing to be a DM, it becomes much easier to find people to play with than the other way around. It's much harder to find somebody who's willing to, you know, run the game for you as it is to find people who want DMs. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about building PCs. There's a reason why it's down there. We'll get there. Don't worry about it. We'll get it. Yeah, that was the first one, or maybe don't. So that's sort of the end of the first point. Is like maybe we don't get some players, and I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Kind of dealing with what you could do when you don't have players, but you still want to run the game. So number 2, I think, is most useful step. Probably is to grab an adventure, right? And I don't mean you don't need to. I'm not saying go grab like Curse of Straw. Not a big adventure path. You need to get like a one-page, a one-session, one-shot sort of adventure, right? We want something very small, very easy to learn, very easy to run, right? We don't want something very large and complicated and has a whole bunch of moving parts, or you know. Try to, like I said, try to homebrew an adventure from the start. Especially if you're brand new to the hobby and you've never run anything, much less played anything, like you're not gonna have the sort of frame of reference to know about like what to include in anything. And if you're going off what's in, you know, the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, frankly, you're probably not gonna be a very good adventure. I mean, that's just my thoughts about the book, and I know it's a lot of people's thoughts about that book. Is that it's just not very good. And it's certainly not. It certainly does not serve as a guide for new dungeon masters. It's just not helpful for them. So instead, I'd say, let's say, I do something like this. Like you can go to the one-page dungeon contest. They have all sort of like previous year winners that I think you can get to. Yeah. Right. You can get like the entire compendium that's got like everything. Right. 84 different ones that were submitted. You can grab those, run those sort of things. Right. Very easy. Doing stuff like that. There's right, you can get it at a drive-thru RPG, right? Pull that up real quick. Open. No. Yeah. Right, so you can get it there. Right, very simple things that are very easy to learn, very easy to run. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for, and you can do literally what I'm doing, which is, which is do a Google search. This is what I was looking for. This is what I was looking for. And right, Tyler Monahan's sort of one-page adventures, which are very useful. I use them for my. It's in my bag. We went over my DM's binder, and that's when I talk about sort of the parachute file, having some very easy things that I can pull out in case the players decide to go off the rails and then decide to, you know, I thought that they were going to do X and they decide, no, actually we think we're going to do Y, and I can pull out something like this, and really great thing where it's got like, here, let's get pull up, there we go, which is like a fort Be like, oh yeah, we decided that we're gonna go into the mountains into the east, and we're not gonna do the entire adventure you just prepped. Great, thanks guys, love it. And you can be like, oh well, while you were going up there, you're like flipping through there was a fort. It's got some orcs in it that you can deal with, right? Just something like this, right? Very easy to learn, very easy to run. You can come up with a reason for why they need to take down the fort full of orcs very easily. Maybe you start off that adventure as a new DM being like, oh, well, you know, the last person soldier who was in that garrison, like, came into town wounded and sort of like recovering in the town or in the village where the players are, and you're like, oh, well, you guys can go check this out. You know, we fought it, and, you know, maybe there's not very many of them, and you guys can take it down and secure that, and of course there will be a reward for doing that and all that sort of stuff by returning it to, you know, the Empire's control, because it will take us like 2 weeks to get somebody to show up to take it back. We don't want them to sort of entrench or whatever. So yeah, I mean, those are the sort of things that I'm looking at in general, right? Here's a pirate ship one, right? You want to do like a ship-based combat kind of thing. Maybe that's a lot of fun. Maybe you can change this around a little bit. You can homebrew this a little bit and be like, oh, maybe it's wrecked instead, right? So that'd be a cool thing to do instead, right? Very, very easy adventures is what I'm looking for. I don't want a like, I'm looking at some of the published adventures sitting on my shelf. Like, even something like adventures that are in Tales from the Yawning Portal or Ghosts of Saltmarsh, things like that, that are already Candlekeep, that are already sort of compilations of smaller adventures, just kind of themed together loosely. Those are really great, but I think that that's still too much for like a first-time DM. Like, if this is literally your first time ever running an adventure, like, keep it very, very bare bones. Keep it very simple. And I think you're going to end up with a lot more success. Like, I wouldn't even say... I think Pandelver and... what is the other adventure in the Essentials kit? Dragon of Icefire Peak? Something like that. I think both of those are good adventures, and I think that they're pretty good, pretty easy for people to run, but again, both of those things are like somewhere between, you know, 10 to 40 hours of gameplay. It's like, we're looking for, like, to run one session, not, like, many weeks or months of sessions. Right, we're trying to do one session to see if we even like playing this game. If your friends like playing this game, if you like running this game, right? We're not making these commitments to being like, oh, all right, guys, for the next 5 weekends, we're gonna be playing this. Like, no, we're gonna sit down and play like one session. That's all we're gonna try to do with that first session. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. He definitely put a lot of things together, right? Dragon of Icefire Peak, yeah. Oh, I couldn't keep track of it. Interesting. I don't think I've ever run it. I think I've played it. Because it's not a new adventure, I don't think. I think it's actually an older... If not, I played an adventure that's very similar to it. But, yeah, I mean, but both... Again, they're longer adventures. I don't think that that's necessarily a great thing. Or even to be trying to come up with things for a first-time DM. That stuff's going to come naturally, right? If you really find out that you enjoy being a dungeon master and you enjoy running the game, you're gonna be just like you're saying, right? You're gonna reach out and you're gonna grab different sources and bring things together, and you're gonna want to create your own adventures. And I think that's great. I don't want to stop you from homebrewing and doing that sort of stuff. I'm just saying, not for the first session, right? Not the first time you DM. Not even probably the first handful of times you DM, right? I think run something that's very straightforward, just so you can understand how to run the game and how to prep for the game. And then once you get that stuff below your belt, once you get that feeling for it, then then we start making transitions, alterations, creating our own stuff. Once we get comfortable with things that other people are doing. There's also a good piece of advice from, I think originally it's from Alan Moore, the comic book writer, where he talks about obviously taking in a lot of media, right? If you want to be more successful at most creative enterprises, you want to take in, so that way you have lots of ideas to sort of like bits to pull from. But his specific advice was like, read bad books, watch bad movies. Because there are a lot of times where you look at something like that and you'll be like, oh, this was a really great idea. Oh, but they really screwed up the execution on this. So now it's teaching you what not to do, rather than just copying things that are already successful. Right? Curse of Strahd is, I don't think, even arguably, the best 5th edition adventure path that's been published. Right? So, reading Curse of Strahd and running it, and being like, oh, these are all the things, and I want to duplicate those things, I think that that's really helpful, right? But I'm not sure it's as helpful as looking at all the things that don't work, right? You're only finding one thing that does work, instead of looking at a whole bunch of things that don't work, right? It's very, sort of subtractive rather than additive, as far as sort of like your DM mindset about how the game runs, what you can do in the DM's chair, and what players sort of like enjoy playing. The dancing cut of Baba Yaga. All right. I think running things like hags are not necessarily something I would say for the first time DM, because hags are one of those monsters, sort of like beings, where they're at their best when they're not being played as just sort of a straightforward monster. And I think that can be difficult to do for first time DMs. I think once you learn more about it, then I think that's very, very good advice. Yeah. yeah, no, I understand. Yeah. But I think a lot of people want to do things like Baba Yaga and hags and things like that. Be like, this is not... Those are more advanced things, right? Those are not necessarily right out the gate kind of things that we want to do. So yeah, that's sort of too, is like find a very, very simple adventure that you guys can finish in one setting, learn it, like read through it multiple times, which can be pretty easy to do because most of the examples I showed you are like one page. So you can sit down for 30 minutes and have memorized the entire thing and maybe not need to look at the sheet ever again. But to do that and make it very, very simple, very straightforward. Don't try to get fancy, especially with your first time. Don't try to create something for the first time. Just try to find something that's very straightforward, very simple, run it, see what works, and see what doesn't. And then in the next sessions you run, if you decide to keep being a DM, right, that's when you're going to start to be able to construct, sort of Lego brick together, your thoughts about DMing and how to be successful at it. Let's move on to number 3. So we've got some players probably. We've got an adventure to run for them. Good. Those are the 2 things we need. So that probably gives us a date for when we need to know things. And so the third thing that I have is, now I think is important to learn sort of the basics of D&D. Now, you don't need to read all 3 books. You don't need to know all that stuff. But you do need to know some things, especially because when you run the game, people are going to be looking at you for answers to questions, if they're new players especially. And for you to be that sort of adjudicator, that referee, you do need to know at least the basics of D&D, right? This is stuff like the dice and dice expressions, right? So you should be able to look at the dice and know which die they are by looking at them, right? Because I know a lot of new players really struggle with that. And then also sort of like the dice expression. So, like, what does 3d6 mean? Right? Those sort of basic things that you need to know. I would say read all the basic rules if you have time. That's really great. They're available for free on D&D Beyond. But if I would say, especially sort of part 2. Let me. Oh, already in there. Let's pull that up real quick. But okay. I would say, especially this sort of part 2 section is going to be the most important to read. Right. About the ability scores, advantage and disadvantage, proficiencies, ability checks, saving throws, all that sort of very basic stuff. And these are not very long sections, right? Right. So yeah, I mean, this is not particularly long. I mean, it's long, but there's a lot of white space in it. And very basic stuff. You can probably skim most of this. Like, do you really need me to tell you what strength is? Probably not. Right? There's a lot of those things that we probably don't really need, you know, the ins and outs of, or need regurgitated to us like that. But yeah, and I think this is a good thing. This is why I had say to choose the adventure first. So that way when you're reading the adventure, you can be like, wait, what is the saving throw? And you can look at the saving throw rules and be like, oh, okay, gotcha. So that way you're only learning the rules that are going to be important for this specific adventure, right? You don't need to know, like, how long people can hold their breath underwater if there's no water in the adventure you're running, right? If you're running that Orc Fort adventure, like, you don't need to know anything about swimming. I mean, you might need to know about climbing, though, right? If they want to climb the walls or something like that. So you're like, all right, well, I should probably read up on some of the climbing. That sort of stuff. But that way, like, if you choose the adventure first, it'll give you a much better gauge about what parts of the rules you need to focus in on, because these are the things that are going to come up in that session, most likely. Difficulty classes, sort of like the general vibes for difficulty classes. In general, right between 13 and 17 most of the time. And improvised damage is another very, very useful one to know, just sort of right off the bat. Falling damage, things like that. Inspiration, right? And even as a DM, like, I almost never use inspiration. I don't give it out to players. I think, like a lot of DMs, I forget about it most of the time. I've got a lot of other stuff going on. Where I find it successful is actually with things that, like, the Fate tokens from Fate or the bennies from Savage Worlds, having a physical object, like, in front of you at the table, like, placed in front of you, is extremely helpful as a reminder to be like, oh, right, give out inspiration. It makes it very easy, and it makes it very easy for players to use it, too. Because then you're just passing a physical object, like, back and forth. If you're playing in person. Obviously, you can't do that if you're playing online. But you may be able, if you're using a virtual tabletop or something like that, you might have some sort of specific icon or token that you can use for that, which would be really helpful. There's not much to it. Like, learn the basics of D&D, right? Know what a check is, know what an attack is, know what a saving throw is. Know how to use the D20, know how to tell people what it is, know the dice, that sort of thing. Right? You don't need to know necessarily have memorized like all the spell slots for a certain class, or know, you know, the specifics of all the armors and things like that. Like, you can always look that stuff up really, really easily. But being able to know how the game functions in general is exceptionally helpful. And that's really all you need to know for your first time. And know that you don't actually need to stop and look everything up all the time. Which I think 5e doesn't necessarily do... Yeah, you have... Online you have Google Images and stuff. Yeah, that's very useful. Exactly. I forgot what I was going to say. That's alright. Man, what was I gonna say? Let's move on. Yeah, so learn the basics of D&D. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, if you read that chapter 2, the entirety of chapter 2 will pretty much tell you everything that you need to know for running D&D and the basic rules. And I think that's a good place to start, but specifically zone in on those sections if you don't have time to read all the rules, which is fine. Especially if you only have like a day or two to prep or something like that. You don't need to spend all that time reading. Just enough to know the adventure that you're planning to run and how to do that, just, you know, successfully. Yeah, like pulling or pushing a crate is a great example, right? About the weight loads. I mean, I don't even know what the weight loads are in 5e, and I can't even think of a time that it's come up. Honestly, now that I think about it, I think the closest thing that I've had for something like that was like a barbarian trying to raise a portcullis in a game I was running. And be like, okay, well, portcullis is pretty heavy, so I don't know, DC 20 strength check. Oh, you're gonna have one of your friends help you? Cool, you have advantage. No problem. Right, very easy to adjudicate, rather than be like, wait, how much would this portcullis weigh? How much with your strength score should you be able to basically lift? Right, I don't think that's useful. More of like the jumping rules. The jumping rules are kind of like that too. Like, in general, jumping isn't a thing that you're going to need to know right offhand, right? It's really not going to come up that often. So, let's move on to number 4. Find or build PCs for the adventure. So we talked about earlier helping players make their PCs, one of the things. And I don't think that that's particularly useful, especially not for the very first time running the game. I think you should have the PCs for them. Have the player characters already made for them by the time they get to the table. Have their characters ready. Right. So I think that helps you. Obviously, D&D and the basic rules already have some that you can just grab generic ones. But again, this is one of the things why we choose the adventure first, and then make sure that we build some player characters. Or choose some player characters, either some pre-gen ones that are going to hit the notes that are going to come up in the adventure. So, for instance, if let's say there's no traps in the adventure, and you might be like, oh, well, then we probably don't need a rogue. But then you're like, oh, but there is at least one locked door in there. Oh, should we have a rogue? Maybe we don't have a rogue. Maybe instead I'll just take a different character and give them the background that's going to allow them to have thieves' tool proficiency. We can get around it that way. Or be like, well, maybe this is one adventure because there's only one locked door in it and there's no traps. That maybe we just make sure that somebody in the party's got a crowbar and you guys can just break the door down, right? Just to kind of show something else going on in D&D, rather than always being like, oh, there's something that's locked. The rogue better take care of it, right? So, but making sure that you do things like if you have, let me think of another example. So if you have an adventure in which part of the adventure, which is kind of how Phandelver starts off, where you need to track some monsters or track somebody through the forest, well, it's going to be very helpful to have a ranger in the party, right? Or to at least have somebody who's trained in survival who has a good chance of making that check, right? Make sure that you put the players in a position where they have the tools to be successful in the adventure through their characters. That's basically all we're looking for when we're building characters, right? So making sure that they have all the tools that they need to be successful. And at the same time, also making sure that the characters that are in that adventure are tooled for that adventure. And by that I mean, if you're gonna run a very, maybe we're gonna do something. I necessarily wouldn't run this for a first adventure, but wanted to do a more sort of like RP intrigue mystery kind of heavy thing where there's maybe not a lot of combat. And it's like, well, you know, maybe don't bring a barbarian character for the group, right? Somebody who doesn't have any talking skills, has a negative charisma, and is just there to basically smash things in an adventure that doesn't have a lot of smashing things in it, right? So it's about making sure that you set your players up to be successful by giving them player characters that make sense for that adventure. Because again, like I said, the entire idea of running this for your very first time is that this is going to be a one and done. It's a one shot. So you're going to run these PCs, and probably they'll never use them again. Maybe they will. Maybe you want to use them again later. Maybe not. Or maybe after that first session, that's when you guys can sit down and be like, all right, let's learn how to make some characters for the people who are interested in continuing playing. That way, everybody can then be like, oh, now I get to make my personal character, and now I have, like, investment in the game, so I want to show up next week, right? That sort of thing. I think that's also useful because you're going to have... We said this is like a one-shot, so you're setting up an expectation that you're only going to have, like, 3 or 4 hours of table time. And part of that... You don't want to spend a lot of that time on making characters, right? Because that can chew up a bunch of that time very, very quickly. Which means that you're probably not going to get through the adventure, which means that you may never get a session 2, which means you'll never finish that adventure, and that's not great for you, and it's not great for the players. We want a one and done, like a complete start and end, totally encapsulated one session, right? So that's why we make these characters. Another thing that I would probably say for a first-time DM is choose second-level characters. I think I love the low levels of D&D, and I love playing and running level 1 characters. But level 1 feels very different than a lot of the rest of the game. And one bad hit will kill a character just straight out at first level, right? Which means there's not a lot of survivability, especially in combat. So I think giving them level 2, giving them some extra hit points, some of the people will start to get some of their subclass stuff, right? So they'll have some more tools at their disposal, but not so much that it can be difficult for new players to pick up. Because we want to keep things as simple as possible, but we also don't want, like, a random short bow arrow crit just straight up killing the fighter in the first round of the first combat, right? We do want to avoid that, basically. So give them some survivability, give them some tools that they can use, some extra powers, right? Some of that fun stuff. And I think that's very helpful for that. And instead of building first level characters, which, you know, fun, but you have to play them very carefully to be successful, and that really doesn't mesh with the rest of the heroic fantasy that 5e is trying to sell most of the time. Yeah, I thought about third level, but I'm thinking for first-time players, too. And I'm thinking that's a lot, because by the time you're getting to the third level, you've got a bunch of spells for the spellcasters and things like that. You're starting to think, because the game only gets more complex, and I don't want it to be too complex. I really only want that second level basically for the hit points, really, to make sure that they survive. Rather than try to load up a new player, because especially if you're a new DM, it's a new group that's new to the hobby, they're going to be asking you questions about their player characters, and you're probably not going to know the answers to those player characters questions. That means you're going to stop, and then they're going to open books and look stuff up, and that really bogs down the game. And again, we're trying to do that one and done, just kind of make it snappy, make it quick, right? We can always, right, if we were going to play a campaign, right, and we were going to live with these characters for a long time, you know, perfectly fine to start third level or higher, whatever band of levels in D&D that you want to play. But I think for a one-shot, a one-and-done, to make it as fast and make it as simple as possible, I think second level is probably, at least in my estimation, the best of both worlds in that, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's basically my thoughts about like finding or building PCs, and it's pretty easy to find second level pre-built, pre-generated characters. First and second level, pretty easy to find. Even third level characters are very easy to find. So you shouldn't really have a problem just having to pull them, which means that you don't have to build them, which means you don't have to be as well versed in the rules, be able to build competent player characters, right? You can just find player characters that fit the bill and use them. So that brings us to sort of like step number 5, which is gather your supplies and that bonus session prep. So what does that mean? So this is sort of like in person, you know, this is where you're being like, all right, where are we going to play and what time, right? Doing the scheduling part, right? As well as, you know, refreshments, make sure that you have the character sheets, that you have dice for people, things like that to play, pencils, scratch paper, all the little bits and bobs that you need to run a successful game in person. Online, you know, determine what you're going to use. For first-time DMs, especially if it's everybody involved is new to the hobby, I probably wouldn't recommend trying to run a virtual tabletop. Like a Roll20 or Foundry or anything like that. I would be like, oh, well, let's play over Zoom or Meet or Teams or Discord or something else. Basically, all I want to do is I want to have a visual representation of who I'm talking to, because I think that helps a lot when possible, and have the audio for it. And then I can always, you know, share a screen if I need to show a map or something like that. That's a lot easier than being like, oh, you also need to learn a virtual tabletop and then be able to import the adventure on it, then make sure that the grid's right on it, and, right, do all that extra stuff, then teach all your players how to use the virtual tabletop and the dice and all that stuff. Right, again, one and done kind of thing, you know, before anybody figures out whether they like it or whether they want to keep playing and things like that, like, just make it as easy as possible to get this thing off the ground and to get it done in one sitting. And then this would also be like sort of the bonus prep, where I talked about, you know, in the beginning I talked about some of the advice or tips that I don't really like, and that's sort of the gather the maps and miniatures and tokens and all that stuff. All these very cool adds to the game, but in my estimation, or in my mind, in my experience, is that that's what they are, is that they're adds. Right. Having a cool backing track or music, having a really cool, you know, illustrated map or animated map, battle map is really cool. You know, having tokens for everybody is always nice, or having miniatures and, you know, all that sort of stuff is really, really cool, and it really adds to the experience. But that's also, if I wanted to put that in sort of an analogy sort of thing, it would be like cooking dinner and making dinner and spending 70% of the time on the presentation of the dinner and not the cooking of the dinner. Right. So what you might end up in the end is a very pretty looking meal that doesn't taste very good. Right. Where instead I'd rather everybody has a really great meal, but maybe it's not the, you know, the prettiest table setting in the world. Right. So that's why I put this stuff sort of in the bonus portion for my mind. It's like, having cool maps and all that stuff is really cool. Having the background sounds and the music and all that stuff's really cool. But at the end of the day, the adventure is what the people come to play, and that's the thing that everybody's interacting with. And so I want that to be as good as possible before I start thinking about some of the other stuff that's sort of on the periphery of the experience. But yeah, so gather your supplies, get everything in order, get all your stuff together, right, during that time, figure out when we're going to play, where we're going to play at, you know, who's bringing snacks or drinks if we're doing that, and all that stuff, get all that stuff figured out. Which kind of leaves you down to number 6, right? at the end of the day, we just, at some point, you have to bite the bullet and run the session, right? And there's no way around that, right? If you want to be a DM, you're gonna have to, at some point, DM. That's sort of how that works. And the problem is that you're never really gonna feel particularly prepared for it, right? You're always gonna be like, oh, I wish I had a little bit more time, or oh, I wish I had, could add this to it, or whatever. So just do it, right? At some point, you gotta Nike, right? You just gotta do it. So my advice, sort of, for that and running the game, that sort of stuff, is try not to sweat the small stuff, right? You're gonna make mistakes, and you may get frustrated with yourself, right? And be like, oh, I forgot about that thing, or oh, no, I screwed up the adventure, or things like that. It's important to remember that your players have like maybe 10% of the investment in the game that you do, right? They want to sit down and roll some funny math rocks and have a few laughs with their friends, right? That's what they're looking to do most of the time, and have some fun, get up to some hijinks, do some cool moves, and probably kill a few monsters, right? That's really all they're looking for out of like that experience. So don't sweat about all the small stuff, right? Don't worry about trying to be perfect. It's a game, and this is just a one shot, right? There's no ongoing repercussions, right? If you totally screw up this adventure, right, it doesn't matter. There's no far-reaching. there's no sort of consequences from those actions that right. If you did that in, say, like an ongoing campaign, you're like, oh no, I've just screwed up like the next 6 months of play time because I totally screwed up and did this one thing wrong, and now, or I said the wrong NPC, and now I've got to work everything around to make that happen. It's like, nope, it's a one shot. It's a one and done. That's it. We're done. If it goes off the rails, that's fine. Again, one shot. Doesn't really matter. So, just kind of try to relax with it. Let's see. Other sort of advice for running the game for your very first time. I would say a purposeful start. This is what Sly Flourish, I've got the book up on my shelf, Sly Flourish often refers to as a strong start. I think that, especially for new players, they need a little help. They need a little coaxing, a little guiding hand, right? Even experienced players, honestly. And this is one of those times where I would say, don't use sort of the trope of like, we start as strangers in a tavern, right? And then we're going to waste, 15 to 20 minutes of trying to get the party together and trying to get the quest underway, right? And that's just chewing up your table time for a one-shot. Whereas I ran a one-shot not that long ago, and that was basically, alright, you guys have agreed, you met this guy in a tavern, you bought a treasure map from him, you're on the road to the place. Okay, done. Now we're going. We're immediately going into it, right? We don't have time in a one-shot, in a single session to, faff about too much, right? We kind of have to get to the meat and potatoes of things and keep churning through it if we want to, get everything done in that one, 3 to 4 hour session or however long you're playing. So yeah, I'd definitely say have a purposeful start. I'd say write down the player character names and their ABCs, their ancestry, background, and class, just so you can use those as sort of references. I know a lot of people will do like their passive perception or things like that. I don't necessarily think that you need to do that. I think it's part of the interaction to be like, hey, what is your passive perception, right? Or does anybody's passive perception 16 or better, or whatever it is? Oh, hi. Nice to see you. We're talking about sort of steps for your first session as Dungeon Master. So yeah, I think really, getting some of those core notes down, that's something that I still do, even as a player. It's the first thing I do as a player in a one-shot or new campaign or whatever it is I write down all the other player characters' names, and their ABCs, so that way, if I know them, as I know them, right, as they are revealed as part of the story, that way I always know all the player character names, I can always refer to them specifically, and it helps me, both as a DM and a player, be like, okay, this person is playing this person's playing this person, this person's playing this person. Which I think is really helpful. It'll help you memorize the name very quickly, because it helps me memorize the name very quickly. And usually by the time we get done with that first session, especially for an ongoing campaign, I've pretty much internalized and memorized all the other character names. And have an idea in my head about who they are, which is really, really helpful. Let's see, other sort of like first time around the games things. Oh, use the tried and true DM like step method, right? Which is, feels like often kind of actually let me grab that. I'm just gonna paste it in here. This will be helpful to have. Just grab this right here. Actually, I'm just gonna put this right in here. So we'll put this down here below the bottom. This is basically like limitless unlocking, you know, that the other 90% of your brain that you don't use, which is not true, but that's fine. Which is basically just how DMing works. And it's just a number of steps, right? Okay. So you describe a scene or situation, right? You ask the players, what do you do? They're probably going to have some questions. You're going to clarify any details, correct any incorrect assumptions they've made, things of that nature. If in what they say they want to do, if you're unsure whether that's going to be successful or not, or whether you think there's going to be potentially any sort of repercussions to those actions, you're like, okay, this is a roll. You're going to need to make a roll. Adjudicate the roll. You know, oh, you rolled a 14. I don't think that's successful, or yes, that's successful. Narrate the PC action, their success and failure, and return to step 1 or 2, depending on whether the situation has changed or not. And so once you realize that basically being a DM is just that series of steps over and over and over and over again, it becomes very, very easy to run D&D, honestly. Extremely easy. Here, let me put this. Again. Do it that way. Adjudicate that roll. Narrate the actions. And return to step 1 or 2. Right, so the process is very, very simple. Once you realize this, and I know it definitely clicked in my mind as a DM, and I was like, anytime that, and I think it's very natural to get nervous, especially when you're starting off a session. Even me, I still get nervous when I start sessions. I don't know why. It's not like I think it's going to go particularly poorly, but I don't know. You get those sort of like jitters, right? Sometimes. And so, but I know things are going to be okay once I get into this formula. Once I get into describing the situation and I'm asking them what they're doing and I get into that loop, then, right, the game basically runs itself at that point. Right? And then you're just basically looking at notes and making changes, and then, of course, you know, rolling dice for monsters to hit stuff and things like that. But the sort of lion's share of the game basically falls into this. So, if I get to the point where I ask you, what do you do? Then I know I'm golden, right? Things are going to go fine once I get to that point. And yeah, so again, this part, one of the things I really want to draw attention to is sort of the answer questions and clarify details and correct assumptions. As I think one of the things you'll find out as a DM is that you and your players rarely have necessarily the same idea or image of the situation in your minds, right? Oh, hey, nice to see you. And so thinking about that and being like, so it's up to you. What we want to do as the DM is put our players in a position where they can be successful, right? And they'll be able to do things, because nothing, at least from my perspective, nothing is more frustrating as a player when being like, oh, I thought A was happening, so that's why I did B. And then you're like, oh, but that A wasn't the situation. Oh, then I wouldn't have ever done that. Right, I would have done something else. Right, feeling that like you lost your turn or something like that because you didn't have the same understanding as the DM did about what was going on, about the situation. So, you know, answer questions, clarify details, correct assumptions. You can do that communications trick where you parrot something, you reword and parrot something back to the player. The player's like, oh, I want to jump over this table and sprint across the room and try to attack this guy with my sword. Like, okay, so I heard that you want to jump over the table. You just want to run around the table rather than vault the table? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, if I can still get there. Yeah, absolutely, you can get there. Be like, unless they're wanting to vault the table to do something cool, or like they're like, I want to grab it and swing on the chandelier across, like maybe there's an open like fire pit in sort of like the Great Hall or something. They're like, oh, I want to do this cool thing where I like jump onto the chandelier and like swing across and jump off and slash my sword at it. And like, all right, yes, that's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to accomplish. Then yes, you can do that. Here's a roll for that. And if you are successful on that, you know, I'll give you advantage on the attack roll or whatever. Try to make it, yeah, describing the scene properly. And I think this goes two ways. I think there are people, a lot of DMs want to solve that problem by being very specific about the description of the scene, right? About every detail that's in the room, all the things that are in there. When I think in general, it's been my experience that what works really well is just giving a very basic understanding and then letting the players ask questions about the details of the room, or if there are things in the room that they're looking for. Because there can be a lot of things that are like, oh, well, you know, it's the Lord of the Castle's bedroom. Okay. It probably comes to your idea what's probably in that room, right? There's probably a bunch of curtains and tapestries. There's probably like a 4-poster bed. There's probably, right, it's a bedroom, so there's probably some end tables. Maybe there's a vanity or some sort of wardrobe, things of that nature, an armoire, that sort of thing. Right. I don't necessarily need to tell you that, but you can make those assumptions very readily, and if you want there to be an armoire in there because you want to hide in it, yeah, there's an armoire in there. There's no reason there wouldn't be an armoire in there. That seems reasonable for the scene. Yeah, improv, yeah. Right, that's sort of what I'm thinking about with the scene details is doing lots of yes ands, no buts. Like, oh, I want to, right. If we want to go back to like the chandelier experiment, they're like, oh, I want to jump off the staircase and swing on the chandelier and jump over here and attack that guy. And it's like, all right, but you're on like the second floor and that's like 10 to 15 feet down. So you wouldn't normally take fall damage from that. Are you okay with taking some fall damage to get that advantage on the attack with your sword? And, you know, give them the choice to be like, oh, I didn't think about that. And they're like, oh, well, I've only got like 6 hit points, so maybe not. Maybe I won't do that, right? Or maybe they will. Who knows? But yeah, let's see. Other advice, I'd say, like, and I've said this a lot as we've kind of talked about this, doing this sort of like one shot for your first session, is to keep the pace pretty quick. Right, don't let the party don't let your players get bogged down or stuck on something for very long, whether that's, you know, a puzzle or they're focusing on something that's not that important. Right, kind of keep the tempo going, because you're only going to have a few hours to kind of get all the way through the adventure. So don't how do I say that? It's okay to kind of fast forward stuff sometimes if you want to montage some stuff. If they're like, let's say that the sort of Lord's bedroom situation, if they want to like search every single drawer and stuff like that, and you're like, I know there's not any treasure in this room, or there's only like 2 pieces of treasure, and they found one of them already. And be like, you can just fast forward and be like, okay, yeah, you guys spend 15 more minutes searching the room, and you also find this treasure, and you feel pretty thorough that you've found everything that's in here. And right as you do that, now you hear voices outside, and just kind of pick it up, keep the pace quick, keep them moving on stuff. And that goes for combat too. Sometimes, and I know people fall on this in a different way about messing with monster hit points or things like that. It's like, I feel like in most combats there is a point that you hit, and once you pass that point, it's going to be very clear whether the good guys or the bad guys are going to win the combat. So once that becomes very clear, push to get to that, to end it as quickly as possible. So we don't really need to spend 2 rounds of mopping up goblins, right? When it's very clear that the player characters have won this combat. Just have them run away, have them surrender, be like, oh, you guys spend a few more rounds and you kill the rest of them, whatever. Rather than being like, spending the time for them to roll out attacks and miss, and now it takes another round to kill that one last goblin, that sort of stuff. Right, that's not necessarily super important to the adventure, so let's just kind of keep the pace up, keep pushing, keep moving. Yeah, making weak encounters is fine. Yeah, I think you can definitely overuse trying to do multiple waves. I think that, right, if that ends up happening a lot, your players kind of expect it, and then they will actually make combats take longer by not using more powerful spells, because now they're just sort of resource guarding it, they're trying to save it, that sort of things. But yeah, usually I'm just like, let's keep it moving, right? Let's keep it moving, keep the pace quick. Right, and I talked about being in the player's corner, setting them up to be cool, have highlight moments, try to do all stuff like make them look cool when you're narrating the actions and when they're killing monsters or whatever they're doing, right? Do that sort of stuff. And I think the final thing, and I talked about this a little bit already, one of the big things for me is that, especially when you're running like a one-shot, especially for people who haven't played before, and you're like, all right, we're gonna spend like 3 to 4 hours of play doing this thing. We're gonna hang out. We're gonna do this one thing. Then finish on time, right? Keep an eye on the clock and be like, all right, well, I said that we were gonna be done by 7 p.m. and it's like 6 now, and I've still got quite a bit of the story left. And if that's the case, then you start sort of pulling stuff out of the middle of the adventure so you can get to the end quicker. Because it's better to end early than go over the time frame that you told people that you were going to be done by. So if just cut things and try to cut from the middle rather than the end of the adventure. That way you still get sort of everything wrapped up really nicely with a bow at the end, right? You feel like you've come full circle instead of like getting 3/4 of the way around and then being like, up, and then you guys beat the bad guy and made it back to town. Right, that's not how you really want to end that session. Right, yeah, definitely share spotlight with players, making sure that everybody gets a little time to shine, and they get a chance to be at the forefront of the adventure is always very important, right? But yeah, I'd say finish on time. That's probably one of the big ones. I think that's especially important when you're running one-shots, and I think it's especially important when you're running for people who haven't played the game before. When you say something's going to take 3 to 4 hours, they expect it to take 3 to 4 hours, not 5 hours, right? Which can very easily happen with D&D, right? I've been on both sides of that, and played in games in which we ran way over the time limit, and run games that went over the time limit. And I think it's just better to finish on time. If you say you're going to be done by a time, finish on time. I think that keeps everybody happier. And I think that you're going to get more likely, it's more likely that people are going to come back to the table if that's the case. So yeah, those are sort of like my big. Oh, alright, there's one more point. I should probably do that, huh? I should probably do all the points. So we've got one more point. Jeez. Oh! You meant like having multiple characters and players share the spotlight. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I assume that that's sort of a given, right? There's never going to be there's not really a time in the game where everybody shares the spotlight, but there are definitely times where individual characters and players have the spotlight, or where maybe half the party does, right? Where you have two going off doing their buddy thing, and then like breaking up into two duos is always a lot of fun, or at least I find that fun, both as a player and a DM. But giving them, it's always this sort of constant people stepping in and out of the spotlight, right? Somebody should always be in the spotlight, and somebody should always not be in the spotlight, right? Because not everybody. There's not going to be situations where everybody's not in the spotlight, or situations where everybody is in the spotlight, because the game just doesn't really work like that. But it's up to you to sort of like make sure there's a cadence and a balance that everybody sort of like gets their time and come together, whether that's separately or together. So yeah, the last one is sort of ending the session and baiting the hook. So what I mean by that is one of the best things I think you can do as DM, especially as a new DM, is ask for feedback in your session. Would I recommend a new player to watch Honor Among Thieves before DMing? I'm not sure I would recommend that over any other sort of fantasy adventure sort of movie, I think. I think watching anything that's going to get you in the right mindset and excited to run games is going to be worthwhile, and that might be the D&D movie. It might not. That might be Conan the Barbarian, or, many of the other sort of like 1980s sword and sorcery kind of films. But I don't think there's anything, in my opinion, that Honor Among Thieves does particularly well in a movie as far as replicating a D&D session. Now, it's been some months since I've seen it, but I don't remember that. That I feel like that was one of the things I was looking for in the movie, but didn't really find in it. Yeah, so I would say anything that gets you excited about DMing, especially as sort of like a source of inspiration and excitement, is always going to be helpful, right? Whether it's a D&D branded movie, or video game, or television show, or book, or not. So within the session, ask for feedback. That's the biggest thing you can do, right? And this is not just feedback for you as a DM, which is very important, right? They're like, hey, are there things that you like, things that you didn't like, that you would like to see maybe next time we play? But really, for this first session, it's really important to gauge how your players feel about D&D. Did you guys enjoy the game? How do you feel about D&D? As sort of a game. Is it something that you want to play? Is there something you liked, something you didn't like? And their answers can help you gauge whether that was something that's adventure specific, maybe class, like their character specific. Maybe it's something about the rule system they don't really like. Okay, those are going to give you some ideas about, which part can you adjust to get them excited about, which things, like, you may find out that like, oh yeah, it was really cool, but, I really don't like the whole fantasy thing. And you're like, oh, alright, well, maybe we can play like a sci-fi kind of game. Maybe something like The Expanse, or something like that. Maybe that's going to be more your speed. uh, yeah, so I think that those are sort of the main things that I'm looking for, or I want to impart to sort of a first-time DM, is sort of those things. I think it's more important for the first time to get the players' feelings about the game, because regardless of whether you loved running the game or not, if they didn't have fun, and you need to figure out whether that's because of your DMing, or maybe it's because they just don't really like D&D, or maybe it's they're like, oh, I didn't really like my ranger character, or oh, I didn't really like this, this specific type of adventure. I'd rather do something. I thought we were going to do something like this, something instead. So the more sort of like data you can sort of pull into that conversation, the better you're going to be able to sort of adjust your DMing style or adjust the game to ensure that everybody's kind of having more fun, right? Which is what we're going to look for if you're going to run maybe a session 2. And I think that's a good point, is then start talking about, like, do you want to try out a different character, right? If you didn't really gel with this character, do you want to try out a different character? Or maybe you guys are more interested about my side, like what happens behind this DM screen. Are you interested in maybe running a game yourself? And I can give you some tips about how to do that, and you can run something like that, and then you can see if maybe that's for you too. Because there are people that come into the hobby and stick and stay as dungeon masters, running games. I'm relatively versatile. I like running and I like playing. I'm very happy doing either one of those things. Obviously they're different types of fun, right? It's a different type of engagement with the game. But I enjoy running games as much as I enjoy playing games. They're just different feels, right? In a lot of ways, it feels almost like a different game, depending on what side of the DM screen I'm going to be on. Let's see. So, fulfills your petty need of being a people pleaser. Oh, yeah, I can feel that. yeah, I think, it does. I think there are a lot of people that really enjoy the control aspect of being the Dungeon Master as well, which can be both bad and good. Right? There's plenty of good that comes with that, but there's also plenty of bad that can come with that as well. So I think your goal, the end of this very first session, is to get your players hooked for playing the next session. And the likelihood is, especially if you're bringing in people from sort of like your social group that maybe aren't familiar with D&D or weren't familiar with it before playing it, there's a likelihood that not everybody's going to want to play again. And I've definitely run for tons of people, and don't get down on yourself if somebody's like, yeah, that was fun, but I don't really want to play again. Right? It's not for everybody, and it's not necessarily your fault, right? It's not like you did something wrong. I mean, you might have. This is why we asked for the feedback. But the truth is like, there are lots of people who just aren't interested in playing D&D, right? So, if somebody tells you, thanks, that was fun, I don't want to play again, you go, alright, cool. But you're probably going to get one, maybe two people out of the people that you run for who are going to be like, yeah, actually that was fun. It was... Usually what I hear is that, oh, it was very different than what I thought it was going to be. Right? And which is very, you have people that come from like a board game backgrounds and things like that, which is, again, sort of like the closest analogy for most people. They're like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a board game, and it's not like that really at all. You're like, no. But if they're interested in them, you want to get them hooked. And I'd say the next thing, if somebody shows that interest, you'd be like, how would you guys feel about doing a 2-shot instead of a 1-shot? So basically, it'll be a longer adventure, so it'll be a little bit more immersive, we'll have a little bit more depth to it, and basically, we'll just need to schedule, like, 2 weeks back to back to run the whole thing, so because we're only going to get through like half of it the next time. And so you set up a different expectation, right? Enough that starts to ID the people who are maybe going to be interested in playing long term, who are going to want to be like, yeah, I'd actually like to run like an ongoing campaign. And those are the people you're going to look at and be like, okay, now it's time to do something like the D&D Starter Center, the Essentials Kit. Where you're like, oh, well, there's this like 10 to 40 hour adventure path that we could run, and you guys can make your own characters, and we can play that. And you're either going to see people who are going to be like, yes, that sounds like a lot of fun, or people are like, that sounds like a lot. I'm not sure I'm interested in that. So yeah, I think this first session, and then maybe that next session, is really going to help you identify the people who are going to be interested in like long-term playing D&D and not long-term playing D&D, right? And then at that point, you'll have had at least 3 sessions behind the screen, and you're going to be a lot more confident about your ability to run one of those longer adventures now, because you're like, okay, I've kind of failed quickly through 2 or 3 different adventures, and now I'm like, okay, now I've got a good idea about what I'm good at as a DM, maybe some spots where I need to work on. Maybe it's time for me to look at sort of one of these adventure paths so I can get an idea of like how people build adventures, so I can start doing that myself, right? So rather than having like a lot of D&D advice which kind of asks you to jump into the deep end with both feet, or like, oh, we're going to slide you in, and then it's going to be a very natural expectation about what you need to do. So that's it. So now I said that there was going to be some bonus, because what happens if you want to run D&D but you don't have any players? Well, you can always run D&D as a solo adventure. Obviously, I do that on Twitch. We're going to get back to that very soon. But you can always run it by yourself. And this is actually really, really great, I think, as a tool for somebody who is a player in D&D and is curious about transitioning to running D&D, to being a dungeon master. Because I think running a solo sort of adventure for D&D kind of gives you a foot in both worlds, right? Because you have to think like a player, but you also have to be able to sort of improvise and create and interpret events like a dungeon master does, dealing with player actions. So I think it's a very natural way to sort of transition from player to DM. I also think it serves as a really good way to sort of learn the rules of the game. Especially, like, say if you're new to D&D, right? You're new to D&D and you want to run for some people, but they don't know anything about D&D. You'd be like, okay, let me get some resources to run D&D by myself. And so that way I can run some combats and figure out how that works, and maybe, adventures, and start doing things like, okay, well, I know that there's a secret door in this adventure, and I'm kind of running myself through it as a rogue or whatever, and now I've failed my investigation check to find the secret door. Ooh, what happens now? Right, then you can start to improvise, like, oh, right, that might totally happen while I'm running the game. What if they don't find the secret door that's crucial to find? Like, how do I work around that? I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. I mean, you could be like, oh, well, you let them stumble around, go explore some other parts of the dungeon. Be like, no, you guys definitely hear voices from behind this wall. And you guys look around back into the hallway and look around the chambers, and there's definitely not another door, but it seems like there's a chamber behind this one, right? And doing those sorts of things that help you sort of improvise how to get around things like bad die rolls, which is very helpful for being a DM, right? How do you get around the players just failing, failing very easy things too? Oh yeah, duet campaigns. I actually really enjoy one-on-one campaigns. Yeah, yeah. I definitely think, right. You only need one other player to play D&D as it's intended, right? You really only need one DM and one player. Now, it's going to be helpful, like, if you do that, I think that's when you start looking into things like the sidekick rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which can be really helpful. So that's not necessarily something that I would throw at a brand new DM and brand new player, because I think that could be kind of difficult to manage, especially if you guys aren't burned up on the rules really well. If you are, then, you know, have at it, have fun. You're going to have a great time. But if not, then that would be one of the things where actually, and I've done this before, where we do with some friends, we actually run sort of headless D&D. So basically, it's like running as D&D as a solo RPG, but with a party, and you can do that with 2 to 4 people or however it is. Yeah. Temporary familiars or monsters, yeah, those sort of things are also helpful. Yeah. Yeah, and I've definitely had a lot of fun playing a solo RPG style, but with multiple people. So like we all play individual player characters, and we still use sort of like a GM emulator to sort of make the adventure up as we go. It's a very different way to play, but if you have friends that are especially enjoy like the RP aspect of D&D, if they're really heavy on the RP aspect of D&D, that could be a really good resource. It's not as good for people who just want to, you know, kick down doors and slay monsters. You can do that, and it'll work just fine. But I think it really shines when you're doing sort of the exploration and the role play social sides of the game rather than the combat aspect of it, if that makes sense. Yeah, like I said, it's difficult to sort of incorporate that sort of stuff into the roleplay aspect. But yeah, I mean, you can always just run stat blocks, right? That's super easy to do, right? That's no problem. Oh yeah. Especially if it's thematic, like you're saying. Yeah, if you have a monster that's thematic to the location you're in, then it's going to work out really well. It'll make a lot of sense. But yeah, so I don't want with this sort of specific tip, I don't want because I know that I originally had that problem with D&D, and this was in the years before. This idea that it's a group game, but I don't have anybody to play the game with. Now this was long ago, and solo RPG stuff did exist even for D&D. I just didn't know it existed. So it is one thing. So I basically got started with D&D from the DM side, but not really. I didn't really have anybody immediately in my life who was really interested in playing it. I found people, right, eventually, and kind of got around to it and kind of jumped in and out of the hobby to begin with. So I think that's one of the reasons why I always come at it from such a very different perspective. Because I remember having tons of fun just like making dungeons and setting up encounters and trying to play solo, but also it being weird because I know everything that's going to happen because I made the adventure or I've read the entire adventure before, and right. So using something like a GM emulator and like a system like that's going to be way more fulfilling, but I didn't not have fun, sort of the thing. Yeah, no, you cannot have Tiamat as your companion. Not yet. But if you want to go Blackguard Paladin, maybe. Maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll see what happens. And so, I think I just want to kind of knock out the last bit of this by talking about have like 5 basically do you want to be a dungeon master questions, which I was thinking about. So, question 1. Do you want to weave an epic tale for your friends? Let's go through all the questions first, then we'll answer them. Question 2. Do you want to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women? 3. Do you enjoy a relaxing time with toddlers, cats, and the mentally infirmed? Number 4. Do you like homework, especially work that will be mostly unseen and unappreciated? And number 5. Are you a group leader or a follower? So think about what your answers would be. You see everything as TMF. That would be a terrible curse. Alright, so question number 1. You have your answers ready? I know I have my answers ready. You want to weave an epic tale for your friends. I think, and of course this is all very, very, extremely subjective from my point of view. If your answer to this question is yes, you want to weave an epic tale for your friends, maybe go write a story. Right? That's... D&D, at the end of the day, is a very improvisational, a very sort of always in flux kind of game, where lots of people, different people are all trying to drive the same bus at the same time. So I think, like, if you have a story in your mind that you're trying to tell through D&D, I think that you are going to run into issues with either your friends or your story. Right. Either you're going to have to let go of the story for your friends, or you're going to have to let go of your friends for your story. Right? And I don't think... So I don't want to go... So in my estimation, don't go into it with the thought that you're going to tell this epic tale. I think go into it to have fun with your friends, and that an epic tale is going to come out of that. Right? Slightly different. Right? You guys are going to have stuff that you're going to think about all the time, that you'll reminisce on for years. Right? Oh, remember that time that we did that stupid thing with the goblin, and we put him in the barrel and pushed him into the waterfall. And you always have that good laugh, right? And all that sort of fun. But I don't think you should go into it trying to do that. I think that if you relax and have fun with your friends, that will come out naturally. And I don't think it's something you can force. But number 2, do you want to crush your enemies? Again, I think that this is going to be a no answer. At least for me. Is that, look, as a DM, it's very easy to be competitive with the players and just wipe the floor with them. Right? Rocks fall, everybody dies. There's not... It's not two sports teams competing using the same rules, right? That's like... It's like trying to play Calvin Ball. Right? Where you get to make up the rules as you're going along, and they have a very strict set of things that they can do as players. So, I think what you definitely want to do is throw challenge against them, right? Throw obstacles and challenges at them, and let them find their way through, over, or around. But as far as just, you know, killing PCs, that it's so easy to get a TPK. It's very, very easy. In fact, I think it's sometimes it's harder to avoid than it is to construct. Certainly. Yeah, no, I think that you have the right mindset with that. Yeah, I think you have the right mindset with that. Absolutely. I think you want to set up the dominoes, and then let them knock them over, right? And whatever's going to happen is going to happen, right? but you can't go into it trying to with an end already in mind and being like, we're just going to ride the rails until we get to that ending story. And I'm going to be very upset with you, my friends, if you try to do something other than stick on the train rails all the way there. Same thing with the TPK. It's like you can always throw more monsters at them. It's super easy. What you want to do is put them in a position where they will be challenged, right? That's, from my perspective, that's what a DM is trying to do, right? Is trying to challenge your friends and players and put obstacles in the path to what they're trying to achieve. And it's not really any more than that, and it's not really any less than that. Set up with Breath of the Wild with a fine start. Yeah, I think that's good. I definitely feel the way that I run games is very much a mixture of sandbox and linear adventures. So there's sort of what I call linear adventures that are happening in the sandbox. And if my players decide to latch on to one of those linear adventures, and they can ride it all the way to the end and do stuff with that, and that, whatever happens in that adventure will impact the sandbox as well. Or if they want to screw off and go do something else, then they can go do that too. And it's like, alright, they didn't want that adventure, that's fine, I'll move on to something else. Oh, yes, how can you win D&D if you're not killing PCs? You bring up a very important distinction. Well, that's one of the problems with being the DM, is that you have to get used to losing, right? If you win, the game ends, right? If you kill the PCs, the game ends. So, that doesn't mean that you can't kill PCs, but it means, like, that's not really your goal, right? Because if you win, the game stops. So, you want the game to, right, have these peaks and valleys of tension and excitement and good stuff and bad stuff always happening, right? And not necessarily flatline, right, and die on you. The universe explodes. I win. Get your crap and get out of my house. Boat in the lake. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like that. More like a boat in the lake. I like that. Right, just kind of going around. I'll do a dream sequence. Yeah, I'm usually not a fan of the dream sequences. I know lots of people use them, and they're fun, right? I've definitely played in some fun ones, but I don't know. It feels very, what is it? What's that TV show that famously ends that way? Is it Dallas? Old Dallas TV show? Where it's like, and it was all a dream. Like, ugh. Great, so there were no actual stakes. Cool. It can be very sort of like pull the rug out kind of things. So question number 3. Do you enjoy relaxing time with toddlers, cats, and mentally infirmed? My answer for this is yes. And this is just deals with, dealing with players. Right? Who, trying to herd cats, they all want to do something different, they're all over the place. They're toddlers, and they're getting upset about, their character not getting their +3 Holy Avenger or whatever. And, and as far as the mentally infirmed, that always makes me think of, like, whenever you come up with puzzles for your game, or anything like that, which I don't include a ton of puzzles in my games, strictly for this reason, is that puzzles will always seem very easy to you if you're the one who came up with the puzzle, because you have all the pieces. You already have, you know everything, and so it makes very, very clear sense to you about what order things should go in. It seems very simple, but it's almost like, as a player, you don't know the extent of the context of things. So even though you may have 5 clues, you don't know that there are only 5 clues. You don't know that you have all the pieces, right? You're like, oh, I've got 5 of 30, right? So it can be very frustrating to sit there and watch your players struggle with something that seems very, very easy. The dream of a mega dungeon. I like a mega dungeon as a dream. That's very cool. I do enjoy that. Because I don't think that mega dungeons make a lot of sense, or funhouse dungeons generally don't make a lot of sense in most worlds. But I do like them as, if you're already in the dream state, then that makes a lot more sense. Like, things are weird because it's a dream. That's why. It's not bound by the, you know, the real world, the real made-up world that we're all trying to play in. Yeah, it's very got a. You're almost describing like a Squid Game kind of aspect to it, which is very fun. Yeah, like that. I may steal the Mega Dungeon Dream. That seems like a very fun thing to do. It maybe doesn't have lasting consequences for what else I might have going on in the campaign. And I don't generally enjoy Mega Dungeons, but it is nice to have like really large ones. Ooh, puzzles and timers. Puzzles and timers. Yeah. Copy paste. Yeah, I enjoy timers too. I think timers can be really rough on puzzles. I think, oh, it's because I had to reset all the auto mod settings, that's why. And so it hasn't kept any of this stuff. So I've got it, like, every time it's the first time it's seeing it again. But definitely, I think timers are really difficult for puzzles because that, I don't know, I feel like you can be maybe punishing for the players in a way. So usually instead of giving them a timer, well, instead of usually giving a timer, what I use is wandering monsters usually in a dungeon. It's like, okay, if you guys have hit the wall and you guys aren't making progress, then I start rolling dice, right? Like, you can't just sit in front of this puzzle door for 3 hours in the dungeon that's occupied by monsters. Like, they're gonna show up at some point. And so the idea is that, but I also provide, like, the solution to that puzzle somewhere else in the dungeon. Usually it's, like, on a scrap of paper or something in, like, a goblin's loincloth or something. So if you go and start dealing with the rest of the dungeon, you'll eventually just find the answer to the puzzle if you're not able to solve it in time. So that way it doesn't become, like, a fail state for the dungeon, if that makes sense, for the adventure. Because puzzles can very easily do that, I find. When you have puzzles that are like, oh, can't get through this puzzle, so now we can't progress the adventure. So you need to have some other sort of like release valve to let them progress in some way. And so it can be really easy to just be like, you know, the monsters are sometimes dumb too, and they're like, I don't know, that, you know, this goblin doesn't remember the puzzle, so they have it written down on a piece of paper. It says, oh, you know, you need to press 1, 3, 2, then 5, then 4. Oh, okay. And then you can just do that rather than having to try to brute force the puzzle or spend a bunch of time not actually playing the game. And number 4, so do you like homework, especially work that will be mostly unseen and underappreciated or unappreciated completely? This is another yes, right? I enjoy the prep of D&D, and I think that those dungeon masters who are very successful or who do it for a very long time tend to have that in common. Well, I shouldn't say tend to have that in common. I think they diverge. There becomes a point of diversion where you either become one of those DMs that gets fed up with prepping, and you're like, I just only improvise. Or you become the dungeon master who's like, oh, actually, I like to prep. It's a different fun part of the game that only I get to do, so I enjoy that aspect of it. I'm definitely in that camp. The problem that I've always had with people who fall on the always improvise side is that every single experience I've had with a high improv DM is that if they prep even just a little bit, their game is so much better. Even if they flaunt themselves as being like somebody who doesn't prep, it's like even if they spend 20 minutes prepping like the basics outlines of something or some NPCs or something like that, like you can tell a difference. Like you can feel their game leveling up as you play it. But that's been my experience with them, anyways. Ooh, hiding a solution behind a roll. I usually don't want to do that because I think puzzles are getting that weird space of D&D where it's not really a player character challenge; it's a player challenge, right? It's not a character challenge; it's a player challenge. That's how puzzles work. And so usually I don't want to be like, oh, well, you know, you have a wizard with you that has a 19 intelligence, so of course they know the answer to this puzzle. It's like, well, then you're reducing an entire encounter down to like a die roll. Or a series of die rolls, so basically at that point you're doing a skill challenge. Well, if you wanted to do a skill challenge, why didn't you just do a skill challenge instead of a puzzle? So I'm not a fan of doing that. I'd rather just put the solution to it somewhere else in the dungeon. Or be okay with it as a fail state. Being like, oh, well, you know, there was this... The guy did this as a riddle about some sort of... Or a, not a riddle, an adage. Not a fable. I cannot think of the word right now. A parable. There we go. Maybe it's like a religious parable, and it's like, well, if you guys don't know the parable, because none of you guys are trained in religion, that would know that parable, then you need to go back to the town and talk to somebody who wouldn't do that. So you have to be okay if it fails state for them to leave the dungeon, if you're not going to provide an alternative path for them to be able to get through that. Which is fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think you need to make that really clear with players, though. Because players will think that if they're here, they should be able to beat this challenge. And truth is no, because none of the player characters are trained in religion, so none of you would know this, right? Because you haven't studied it. Anagrams, yeah, anagrams are a good one. I like anything that swap that, like codes and ciphers work too pretty well. Oh yeah, well, thanks for hanging out. Enjoy the rest of your day or night. We'll see you next time. Yeah. Oh, not yet. I'm jumping the gun. Get out of here! That's alright, we're basically done now. So yeah, I think with the homework is that you have to be okay with the prep work that you spend outside, and understanding that a lot of the work that you're going to do is often not going to get seen at the table. Like I said, your players have like 10% of the investment in the game that you do. They're not probably going to appreciate the work that you put into it, right? That's sort of how handcrafted items work in general, right? If you artisanal items, if you put a lot of work into something, and people are like, "Oh yeah, this is a great thing. I really enjoy the way that it does the thing that it's supposed to do." It's like, yeah, but it took me like a lot of time to make that. Like, yeah, I don't actually care about that. I just like that it does the thing that it's supposed to do. Right. Oh yeah. So I think you just have to be okay with that. If you're okay with that, then you're going to be alright as Dungeon Master, right? If you hate spending a bunch of time and doing a bunch of work that isn't going to be seen and isn't going to be appreciated, then maybe it's not right for you, right? It may be something you don't want to resent your players over it. Yeah, you can recycle things for sure, but yeah, saving your work is important, right? And that's something that I think you learn over time, right? Is that you can always recycle stuff. In fact, you can recycle stuff in the same game with the same players, the stuff that they've already done. Boom, new content. Yeah, you can definitely just file off serial numbers, change some names, and be like, oh yeah, instead of a goblin hideout this time, it's a cult hideout. And basically run the same adventure a few months later. Very easily, honestly. And like I said, because your players aren't nearly as invested as you are in the game as you are as a DM, you can totally do that, and they probably won't notice. And Deja Vu Master, like, this seems very familiar. Oh, that's weird. I don't know why. And just play it off. And then sort of the 5, are you a group leader or a follower? Now, I know that you said that you're a people pleaser, but I think that this is one of the things that I know a lot of DMs struggle with, and it's definitely ones that I don't feel like I struggle with it very much. I mean, I've definitely made mistakes with it in the past, but I definitely know Dungeon Masters who do struggle with it, that I've played with, is that you can't get bullied by your group, right? At the end of the day, you are the Dungeon Master. You are the master. It's in the title. At the end of the day, you are the master. So you get to choose how the game goes. Ooh, gotta plead the 5th. Plead the 5th. So, you know, are you the sort of person who can comfortably tell one or more people to their face, no? Even, especially if they're people you like. Right, I think that avoids some of the larger DM issues where you have people, right, you see those sort of like horror stories where like people who have like Monty Hall campaigns, or you know, one person who's playing this ridiculous homebrew that doesn't make any sense and it's totally broken, but the DM like refuses to tell them no, or won't deal with a problem player even though everybody's like, hey, we really need your help, like sort of addressing this, those sorts of things. I mean, I guess that's true. I guess you could just always have them roll on something. I think this is more like a communications people sort of interaction kind of thing, necessarily than a game rules aspect sort of thing. Is that you need to be, I don't know, it seems weird to be like, you just need to kind of learn to be okay with being uncomfortable and addressing uncomfortable things. And that's more of a life skill, I guess, more than anything, right? Is being able to have those sort of conversations and being able to stick up for yourself and your players as well. But yeah, I mean, so depending on how you answered those, you will understand whether you probably are going to be okay as a dungeon master, or maybe it's not for you. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I had here. I'm actually probably going to keep... Well, what time is it for me? Oh, it's getting a little late. Is it wizard time? It's getting a little late. I do actually have to do a few things. I may jump on later, though. I have some more content that I actually do want to stream after this. It may be... Yeah, I've got it saved. I'm definitely going to go over your stuff. I'm just not going to do that right now. But I'm definitely going to go over it. So yeah, I think that... Yeah, we'll cut this here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Do you guys have any questions, I guess, before I take off? I should ask that. You guys have any questions? Sleep in peace, for sure. Sleep in pieces. Nice. Nice. Good. Good. Did you guys enjoy? You guys don't necessarily need to be staring at this front screen. There we go. Boom. Now you can see my lovely bed. Yeah. No, this is always a lot of fun. I enjoy streaming. I enjoy talking D&D with basically anybody I can get a chance to. I always enjoy it. enjoying, my ideas are my own, but obviously other people got other issues, and I'm always interested in hearing their other people's opinions about stuff, because I know that people come from a different perspective or have different experiences than my own. And I'm always eager to be able to learn about those and incorporate what I think will work for me. You have a confession. What's your confession? You've never played D&D. Well, you should play D&D. It's a lot of fun. And now you know that you can run D&D. So, there you go. All you need is some friends. Actually, we even talked about that. You don't even need that, right? You can do it by yourself. That's one of the things that I do here as well, is I run some sort of solo D&D with Leah. That's the character that I'm playing. So actually, if you want to check out some of that solo D&D RPG stuff, you can find that. Everything for that is saved over on YouTube. 7-step guide to getting some friends. I'm not sure if I have 7 steps. Yeah, I think you start off with people to try to get people interested. There's going to be family members, friends, classmates, co-workers, that sort of thing. Or you can always go online. I mean, I've had success finding players online. It's one of the things I had to do when I moved cities and moved to a city where I didn't know anybody, right? And finding people through D&D was very helpful. And so you can always look at things like Reddit, like looking for group and things like that. I prefer to play in person, so another good source is to... I don't have any time. Yeah, no, that's totally understandable. That's definitely understandable, I get that. I would definitely say, like, when you have an opportunity, I think I enjoy playing in person a lot more than playing over the internet. So I would look at the hobby stores that are sort of in your area. There's usually, most places have at least one gaming store that sells, like, comic books or, like, Magic the Gathering cards, things like that. Usually those will have some, like, D&D or other RPG people there too, and so it's always helpful to, like, go there and talk to the staff. They may have a bulletin board with people that are looking for members for a group or a DM or whatever. That's always a good way. I've had success doing that as well. Yeah, or like I said, you can look online. Reddit, looking for groups, very good. You can use Roll20, Roll20.net, which is a virtual tabletop, but they have an entire sort of forum section, and they have people that are always looking for players or DMs and things like that for online. So if you're comfortable doing that, that's always fun. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for me, at least for right now. Like I said, I might stream later. We'll have to see how things go. I gotta eat something first, honestly. But thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Always a lot of fun. And hey, is there anything else I need to talk about? If you want to look for solo RPG stuff, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/RedRaggedFiend. You can find all that stuff. The other things, Drive-Thru RPG, you can visit the website, RedRaggedFiend.com. Blogs for all sorts of, primarily DMing stuff. Same sort of stuff that we've talked about here, but all sorts of other things too. And you guys have a great day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.